The next question that follows is whether it was necessary for the two superior courts to adopt the basic structure doctrine and thereby devise a fourth-way path for amending the Constitution outside the three pathways that are stipulated in Chapter 16. To answer this question requires one to appreciate how the High Court and the majority of the Court of Appeal judges proceeded to analyze Chapter 16. It was on the premise that based on the history of IPAR amendments of the repealed Constitution during the pre-2010 dispensation, the Constitution demanded heightened procedures beyond the tiered design of the amendment procedures provided in Chapter 16 that would make the Constitution more difficult to amend. The two courts, therefore, did not go into a detailed analysis and to specifically point out the actual shortcomings of the provisions of Chapter 16, especially in light of all the 21 unsuccessful attempts that have been made over time, over the last 10 years, to amend the Constitution. The Court of Appeal, in my respectful view, and a duty to analyze the findings of the High Court and specifically point out whether there were apparent inadequacies as far as the provisions of Chapter 16 were concerned. Looking at the history, as stated above, as well as the provisions of Chapter 16, it is clear to me that Kenyans sought to achieve a balance between rigidity and flexibility in the amendment process. Kenyans did not want to shift from one extreme of IPAR amendment to another extreme where no amendment can take place. That is from IPAR amendment to ultra-rigidity in the amendment process. Rather, what Kenyans desired is a balance between rigidity and flexibility, as reflected in the tiered amendment process in Chapter 16 of the Constitution, with the core or essential features of the Constitution being accorded heightened protection, but still open to amendment through an enhanced, inclusive, and participatory process that culminates in our people exercising their sovereign power through ratification in a democratic process in the form of a referendum. The High Court and the majority of the Court of Appeal, with tremendous respect, failed to appreciate that the tiered amendment process is one of the options available in the menu of constitutional designs options for dealing with the practice of abusive amendments, just like other designs options limit amendability. For example, eternity clauses and basic structure doctrine. Therefore, where Kenyans have selected the tiered amendment procedure as their response to the culture of hyper amendability, I find it difficult to justify this judicially created fourth pathway of amending the Constitution founded on the basic structure doctrine. Unfortunately, there was no justification provided to demonstrate the lacuna in the Constitution and hence the need to call in hand the basic structure doctrine to enhance the existing tools of interpretation. The 2010 history of Kenya is replete with precedents of application of foreign laws and doctrines from Commonwealth and other jurisdictions, which was done due to absence of local statutes. Today, I dare say that courtesy of our Constitution, we have sufficient arsenals that include our own canons of interpretation, which we must exhaust before borrowing from other jurisdictions. Further, I see a potential conflict within the constitutional system with the judicially created fourth pathway for amending the Constitution. This is for the simple reason that in our constitutional dispensation that is people-centered, our nascent democracy that respects the doctrine of separation of powers by vesting legislative power in the legislature, to create a fourth pathway within the scheme of amendments would bring into question the place of the participation of the people and the place of the legislature in that scheme, taking into account where we are at in our constitutional democracy. Kenyans needed to be consulted on whether it is their wish to introduce the fourth pathway for amending the Constitution. In other words, we judges should be vigilant, lest we are accused of usurping the sovereign power vested in the people by introducing a constitutional amendment through judicial fiat. Put differently, the tiered amendment process provided in Chapter 16 of the Constitution is a design option for dealing with the problem of abusive amendments and obviates the need for judicially created limits to amendments power like the basic structure and doctrine. This is in line with the view expressed by Professor Rosalind Dixon and David Randau. My take home from this scholarly perspective is that tiered design of constitutional amendment process is one of the design options used to curbing the problem of hyper-amendments. Professor Rosanai rightly points out in his well-balanced amicus brief that the applicability of the basic structure doctrine depends very much on the context. The most important contextual consideration is the balance between flexibility and rigidity of the amendment process. The more difficult the amendment process, the less there is need for a doctrine of limits to amendment power. The jurisprudential underpinning of this view is that in a case where the amendment process is multi-stage, involves multiple institutions, is time-consuming, engenders inclusivity and participation by the people in deliberations over the merits of the proposed amendments, and as downstream veto by the people in the form of referendum, there is no need for judicially created implied limitation